My name is Valeria Macalupú. I'm a Postdoctoral Research Fellow for Program 2 in Human-Robot Interaction. And yeah, today I'm going to show you 4 design methods through 4 case studies in human-robot interaction and other practical tools for human-centered robotics. If I am running out of breath, it's because I think I'm coming down with something, so I apologize if I sound a bit nasal, but I'll make my best. I'll do my best. Let me start with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay respects to the elders, past and present, from wherever you are. So before I move on into the 4 design methods, I want to start by establishing design as a strategy role in human-robot interaction, because design can help robots make robots understandable, acceptable, and aligned with human needs throughout the research, design, and implementation processes. And I really like this example because it's the case of a robot that worked perfectly well and it did what it was supposed to do, yet it was rejected by the stakeholders and users and the context. So DigiDog, which was a Boston Dynamics Spot robot, was acquired by the NYPD's, the New York Police Department's, back in the 2020, 2021. And it worked perfectly well for, doing everything it needed to do. Navigate stairs, provide live video in hostage situations, inspections, and ultimately protect police officers, right? But it evoked a dystopian or authoritarian reality, kind of like something out of Black Mirror, and it triggered fears of surveillance and militarization. And this happened not because of what it looked like necessarily, but because what the NYPD didn't account for was the context. And back in 2020, that was right after the Black Lives Matter protests. And so there was a lot of political activism around police reform and racial justice. So on top of that, there was this big question of, okay, if you're putting robots on the street to patrol and to protect officers and supposedly the public, then what kind of policing is the police doing? Ultimately, this led to public backlash and contract termination, which always leads us to the question of, if the robot fails in the context, then does it matter if it worked really well in the lab? And there's a lot of cases like that where robots work really well in the lab or in different contexts, different to where it was supposed to originally. And sometimes that's because design has been left as some of the final steps during this whole research and implementation process. So in that sense, this is a nice opening to show how I'm going to present design to you today in 4 different strategic roles. So we're going to see design here as a contextual exploration and, oops, that closed. Hang on. Sorry about that. I think it kicked me out. Let's see if we can bring that up again. Yeah, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so here we are. Design as contextual exploration to help navigate unknowns in diverse environments. So this is traditionally at the beginning of a research project, design project. We're going to see design as a shared sense-making that helps facilitate a collective understanding of needs, challenges, and opportunities. Design as provocation, which is my favorite, to critically reflect on surface ideas and potential future technologies and scenarios. And finally, design as framing, to help scaffold conversations for reflection, critical and creative decision-making. You're going to see through all these 4 case studies that the stakeholders are intrinsically involved in, throughout these methods. And these are all framed under the participatory design approach, which I think it's been covered in previous seminars in the past. So first, design as contextual exploration. We're going to focus on a method called cultural probes. Cultural probes are exploratory kits given to participants to gather personal, contextual, and emotional insights about their daily lives and environments. We use this method in a project that was part of my PhD, the first study I conducted, and it was called Asynchronous Toolkit for Designing Social Interactive Robots. The purpose was to understand older adults' home and habits as the context where a potential new robot could support their independent living and social interactions. The reason why we use cultural probes was to elicit lived experiences and values through remote engagement. So what we did was design this asynchronous toolkit that had both digital and physical components. The digital ones were an online video playlist introducing the study and some self-guided activities that they could do on their own pace. With that, I also had a digital booklet that summarized those activities. And we had a PowerPoint template that would help the researcher to collect participant results and use them on follow-up interviews. So these cultural probes helped us understand, what their home looked like, what their habits look like, without actually going to their homes and doing something like ethnographic observations, for example. So in such, cultural probes had the benefit of remote stakeholder engagement for early insights when you're starting to open up the design space, the research space. It was easy to implement, and it was inclusive and scalable to a different amount of participants. Now we move on to design as shared sense making. And we focused on co-design workshops as a method, which is probably one of the most popular methods in participatory design. If you don't know, co-design workshops are structured sessions where we bring together stakeholders, from multi-levels, from frontline staff to end users to CEOs, managers, and together they collaboratively generate ideas and define concepts based on their lived experience and expertise. So in this case, we had this project with a team of the QCR, Glenda and Yvonne Miller, and we designed Helpy, a social service robot for aged care. The purpose of this robot was to alleviate a lot of these frontline staff repetitive tasks, like delivery, laundry delivery, food delivery, cleaning, and disinfection. The reason why we used co-design workshops was to quickly and easily engage stakeholders. We have managers and CEOs. We had even architects involved in the aged care facilities. And most importantly, we had the frontline staff, both in the people that took care of older adults, but also the cleaning staff and people in charge of cooking and laundry, all together in different stages to develop an understanding and a direction for this robot. Thus, this process helps to build ownership from these stakeholders. They feel involved and part of the process, and it helps align design with existing cultures, workflows, and systems, which are very important for any kind of context that you want to intervene and figure out when and where a robot can make the best impact. Particularly when these workflows are already so well structured that including a robot can look like something that would destabilize a whole system. The practical benefits of doing this co-design workshop method was to build support and commitment from stakeholders from the very beginning, and also to clarify how to implement these robots in real world settings, and thus clear up the way for future developments. Okay, this is my favorite one. So design as provocation, we used this method called provocative prototypes or prototypes. I used this also as part of my PhD in a second study. Now, the prototypes are deliberately provocative prototypes, sorry. These are designed to challenge assumptions, spark discussion, and reveal hidden values or tensions. Now, this was part of my PhD project focused on co-designing social interactive robots with older adults. But this method specifically was designed to reflect on what participants have shared in the previous session, their preconceived ideas on robots, what they thought they wanted for a robot in their home so that they could live independently for longer and to engage with their social communities. Why I like it so much and why it's so beneficial, it's because it's almost as a tangible consequence of their initial data or findings. So initially in the first study with the cultural probes, they shared or they expected a robot that would help them with their daily habits, particularly with crafting activities, because that's a lot of what they did in their free time, now in retirement. And having that could be an instigator of social engagement and further advance their independent living. So when they saw this provocative prototype of a robot that would do that, then they realized that that's not exactly what they wanted. They realized that their hidden value, the most important thing for them was actually a robot that would keep them out of nursing homes. And that sparked a whole nother conversation. Prototypes are normally implemented in workshops or in focus group settings, so where more people can react to it and spark very interesting discussions. And that was the practical benefit, you get a lot of quick and rapid insight from those values and deal breakers before moving on to investing time and money in developing these high-tech robots or fully functional robots. It's mostly as let's say a teaser that will tangibly show what people are expecting or thought they wanted. And sometimes you might get a different reaction to what you expected, but that is still a positive outcome. Then finally, we got design as framing. This is an ongoing project that we're doing now in the Human-Robot Interaction program with Stryker. It's project 2.6, Right Tech, Right Task, Optimal Technology Determination for Specific Applications. Like the name mentions, we're trying to develop a framework to identify new or improved ways to use the Mako robot or other technologies in orthopedic surgeries. Now, to implement a new technology or to use a robot in new applications, sometimes that takes a lot of decision making, takes a lot of discussions and a lot of time. So we've used two design methods, design patterns and card-based methods. Design patterns are reusable high-level solutions to recurring problems in a specific context. So in human-robot interaction, they help teams recognize common challenges and offer structured ways to address them through design. For example, a design pattern can describe how to support effective communication between humans and robots, and in this case, the surgeon and a supportive robot like the Mako. And we do this through consistent stakeholder feedback. Card-based methods, we use that to show design patterns in the form of prompt cards to guide teams in reflecting about problems, comparing options, and making decisions across disciplines and across sectors from the Stryker company. So the practical benefits that we're seeing, and we're still in developing this project, but we're seeing that the tool can assess technology options and thus reduce trial and error in adoption. We're developing this framework so that it can be included in multiple parts of the design process, which I'll explain next. But we'll see more about this in the final seminar sometime August or September, I think. So this is the first practical takeaway I want to give you guys. And this is when to use each design method and when would it be the most beneficial. If we think about the design process in a traditional understanding, we have these general 4 phases: discover, define, develop, and deliver. And if we had to put all these 4 methods, I would say that cultural probes help define the problem space. So normally we use that at the beginning. The considerations we need to have is some time for developing the material and allowing time for self-guided participations from participants and following that up with an interview. So it can take a little bit of time. Co-design workshops, we use it more in the define phase. Once we understand a little bit more the research space and we want to involve stakeholders together to shape ideas, align needs, and define early concepts. Prototypes come further into the developing phase, and they're good for testing assumptions and refine design directions based on earlier insights, so earlier in the discovery and define phases. A consideration to have is that a mid-fidelity or a working prototype would be good for a better experience and collecting better insights. In the case of the design patterns and card-based methods, these are quite flexible throughout all the 4 phases, depending on the format that you use. And like I mentioned, we have exploration to support ideation, compare multiple technology alternatives, or to evaluate solutions towards the end and facilitate delivery and implementation. Now, the second practical takeaway I want to leave you with is, based on these 4 methods and all my experience in human-robot interaction from the design perspective, I developed a design canvas, which is a canvas with a bunch of components that I've considered when uptaking a new project in human-robot interaction. It's divided in multiple groups, so I'll go through each one of them. Traditionally, I start with a primary research, if there's any, like past interviews, observations, or any other studies. And if not, we start with state-of-the-art research, looking at existing technologies, design products. We also start with understanding the current system and start writing down a list of principles or design dimensions that will guide these human-robot interaction design. But we also have to consider users, the stakeholders, roles, relationships, and their level of technology literacy. We also consider the context, ergonomics, and specific design for this specific user or context that you are researching, because that also involves using guidelines or constraints for that case study. And of course, we need to understand and define what are the tasks that the robot is meant to do. And similarly to understanding the current system, we also need to understand what is the current journey map. So the activities, routines, and pain points that are happening at the moment. And after that also the experience journey. So what that journey map would look like with a robot integrated into the workflow or the system. We also consider interactions between human and robot. And as well, something that sometimes we forget are the ethical considerations and sustainability and impact. Particularly resource and labor implications, social outcomes, the product life cycle itself. So in a nutshell, benefits and potential risks. The next the next components are often disregarded, but I like to bring them to the front line. And this is the traditional design aspect of robots. That includes mood boards and color palettes and AI visual prompts. Now, I want to highlight something that people don't think about, which is the color palette, because in previous projects, I realized that through research, the color palette can have emotional and psychological tone and constraints, even social and cultural considerations, particularly when you look into a context like aged care or older adults. So don't disregard it. They can all have a very important impact on the overall design of the solution. And finally, I'd like to leave an ideation space in the middle. And that is from, new workflows or new technical specs to consider, to sketches, material cues, early concepts. And I like to leave it in the middle because you tend to forget about certain aspects of these canvas, but so having this ideation space surrounded by them facilitates that when any new idea that you bring, you can connect it back or make sure that you're following these design principles, these components, these tasks, ergonomics, etc. Whenever you're using the methods that I mentioned in this presentation or others, just consider these components in this canvas to inform and guide your research. And what it might look like filled up is something like this, which is how we developed the Helpy robot, the social service robot for aged care. And I think that's all for me today. There are a few QR codes here if you want to read more about the publications from these 4 case studies and something more. And I'm happy to keep chatting or answer questions if you have any. Thank you. Yes.
Who's got questions? Hey, Val, can I start with a question?
Yes.
So how do you deal with, sort of from a methodology point of view, with competing users? And you can think of examples like, I don't know, a hospital where you've got, medical staff, you've got the patients, and then you've got friends and family of patients, visitors. So say you had a robot working in a ward. So that's just so sort of a general thing where you may have competing things where the medical staff might want something, the visitors might want completely the opposite. How do you sort of deal with that? Are there methods to deal with these sort of conflicts in what people want?
Yes, I would say probably the most useful here would be co-design workshops, because that's a good opportunity to bring those conflicting views into one table and facilitate that discussion. And that would, in that sense, the researcher becomes a mediator of all these different opinions. So we might find that we need to sacrifice a few needs and wants from certain sectors to facilitate, the robot working properly. We might find that there needs to be changes in the system. So it's an ongoing conversation, particularly in this project we saw through multiple workshops and from different groups that it is, like I said, an ongoing conversation. And if you bring them all together, it's, the best way.
And is there opportunity then, because we're talking about robots as well, that the robots have different behaviors and personalities depending on which cohort they're talking to at the particular time? So you don't come to a conclusion and design it one way that sort of helps everybody. But, if the robot's working with medical staff, it behaves in this way. If it's talking to a visitor, or it behaves in a completely different way. Is that done very much? Are people considering designing multiple ways of interfacing and switching?
I'm not sure if it's done a lot, but I think it is considered. And through these projects, it was highlighted. For example, frontline staff recognized that while they wanted communication to be as clear as possible and to follow the same language, also recognized that residents, on the other hand, wanted the robot to have a bit of a conversation, not a full-length conversation, but at least to use Australian language, Australian slang, and to be socially polite. Because a lot of the language that came with these already designed robots was too direct and it was rude.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
So what's next? How are you planning on? Have you used the? Is the canvas that you've the latest the canvas that you showed at the end? Have you published that, or are you gonna trial that with in any projects? I mean, I know elements of this are coming from the different projects, but all together, or is that to be determined?
A little bit of both. It hasn't been published yet, but it's something that I'm looking forward to testing with a new robot project, human-robot interaction project. But what I'm working on right now has a little bit of this to do. So I'm starting to research on design affordances behind the design of human-robot interaction. So that means that questioning a little bit why robots are designed the way they are, why they are white and shiny and plastic. And if we take it away from a very constrained context, like healthcare or something like that, what does the design tell? Does it facilitate or does it challenge people trusting and relating to a robot? So it has items from this, and I could definitely explore how this could fit into that project. Yeah.
So will you look at clothing for robots and whether that might happen? Good idea, bad idea? It doesn't seem to be happening, but I'm kind of question why. Well, you know, why they don't have uniforms, why they don't have all this stuff.
Yeah, I wonder if, you know, if particularly with humanoid robots being more popular now, and you put them in a social space, if people would think that they look naked and they need some sort of clothing, you know, it could impact the way that we socialize with them or we just interact with them.
And whether that clothing then sort of indicates their role in a particular context.
Yeah, if it communicates, like I can ask help for this person, if I can't find a member of laundry or from the kitchen staff, can I ask this robot if it's using the same uniform?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. A lot of you might have dogs, but whenever, my dog wears a collar, and it's a simple thing, right? But when, let's say she has a bath or something and you take the collar off, it's like, oh, she's naked. Right? It's like something is missing, something is wrong. Yeah, but that would be interesting to, I guess, explore, how people would respond to the different uniforms and things.
And hats. Get hats for robots.
It makes them more friendly or playful or whatever.
So in the new project that I'm looking at, I'm also interested in, what would be people's reaction if a robot is made out of clay rather than plastic, or, a translucent element or light. Would that change the way they treat a robot and maybe treat it more carefully or differently, or might not think that it's a robot?
So many things to research. So-